Back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Dr. Richard Sauder. And Richard, you with me?
Yes, Solaris, I'm right here.
And I was going to ask you were talking about the darkroom experiments, which I find very fascinating. You obviously, or maybe you haven't, but have you worked with float tanks very much?
No, I haven't. I've never been in a float tank. I wouldn't mind doing it. I've just never had the opportunity. I've never been at a facility like that. I was never invited there. Never had the money to go to those places. I still don't.
Okay.
But getting back to the darkroom experiment, that's what a poor boy does when he doesn't have a dark flotation tank. And it's the poor man's answer to that. So what I did was I duct taped my bedroom and the adjoining bathroom such that the windows and the doors such that no ambient light would come in from outside. It was dark. And I didn't turn on the light. What happens after a while is you start to see in the dark. One of the things that happened to me was after a few days go by, you just take off your clothes. Why should you, if you're by yourself in the dark and there's no one else there, why do you need to wear clothing? So you just finally decide, why am I getting dressed? Because you can't tell if it's day or night anyway. And past a certain point, you're not necessarily able to tell if you're asleep or awake either. And what happens is you may see people that are there with you, and I'm guessing they're always there with us, but we're blind to them. What happened to me was there were two lovely young women who showed up, just naked as jaybirds, and they sat down with me, and it was just as natural as could be. I don't know exactly who they are, and I didn't remark on their coming. It was so seamlessly natural. Once you get out from this artificial reality, you see, where you're completely in the dark, when it's just you in the dark, you start to slip out of the grasp of this artificially contrived reality in which we swim every day. And your so-called natural consciousness begins to come more and more to the fore. Anyway, I was totally compatible with these two young women. They were much younger than me. I would guess they were late teens, maybe 18, 19 years old, something like that. And just wonderful. We just sat there together. We didn't talk. And they were as real as could be for me. And I felt 100% compatible with them. There was no sexual or erotic dynamic to the scenario at all. It was like three little children just sitting around together. I can't tell you how natural and free I felt with them, and I know they did with me as well. We clearly had a deep connection, I don't know, at a DNA level or a soul level maybe, or both. Mm-hmm. It didn't surprise me or frighten me at all. I can't tell you how natural it was that I couldn't tell you when they arrived and when they left. It was just seamlessly natural. That's somewhat the same kind of thing that ayahuasca does, where you see things and things happen, and it's so seamless and it's so natural, at least for me it is. And other things happened. There were beings that showed up. I suddenly became aware there was a snake there looking at me. And that again did not startle me in the slightest way. I just suddenly became aware, hey, there's a snake. And the snake looked at me, and I looked at the snake, and I couldn't tell you when the snake came and when it left. Those are the kinds of things that can happen in the darkroom experiment or experience. I've read accounts for some other people, and there are other people who've also reported this business of other human beings just showing up and it seems so natural.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
What happens is your consciousness is opening to its more natural state. Essentially, we are spiritual beings. In this false reality I've been talking about in various ways, we lose sight of that. We are intended to lose sight of that. One of the purposes of this false reality is to rob us of our naturalness, because the false reality is not natural, and it appears to resent our natural side and want to control it, or if possible, eliminate it. And while I was carrying out this long darkroom experiment, and I did a number of them, but on the longest one of the National Public Radio programs did an interview with Ray Kurzweil. And I listened to this man there in the dark. And then they reran this program a number of times over the next week or two. I kept hearing this over again. And I thought to myself, now this man is seriously disturbed, because he wants to merge his humanity with the machine. You see, to me, that's not natural. That's regression, not progression.
Right.
And it's diminishing of your humanity, artificially diminishing your humanity. Mm-hmm. I don't know why Ray Kurzweil wants to do that, but he's being paid a lot of money right now to develop technologies to do that. He's being paid by Google, and he's working at a very high level for Google. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that on a certain level, spiritually, I was meant to encounter his way of thinking and his really his what would you call it, his policy trajectory, and at a certain spiritual level. I was meant to encounter that, and I did in the darkroom experiment. And then, in another sense, I encountered an even deeper level of it via ayahuasca. And if you think about the world carefully and you observe it, you will see there's a great deal of truth in the things that I'm saying, not because I'm saying them, but because it's the way things are. And ayahuasca, among other entities, has pointed it out to me. Not that there's anything special about me, it's just that I accepted the information that was given to me, and I'm not frightened to talk about it publicly. You know, so many people are frightened to talk about the experiences they have. And that's another issue we have as a species, the tremendous burden of fear that so many human beings are carrying.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Scared of everything, including many people are scared of themselves. They're scared to know who they are. And that's why a lot of people drown themselves in alcohol, for example. They consciously go unconscious. Wrap your head around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, escape into a false matrix again. You know, what's interesting, you mentioned before, I've heard this before in a previous interview with you, ayahuasca is a living, it's alive, right?
It is. In fact, a lot of plants, well, I think every living creature is conscious to a degree, mm-hmm. some more so than others. But certainly I think all plants are conscious to a degree, whether phytoplankton, a cell of phytoplankton, it's a small organism that lives in the sea, is as conscious as a mature ayahuasca vine. Personally, I have my doubts, but I do believe all biological life is conscious to some degree. And in the case of certain of the plants that shamans use, for example, in South America, I'll just name, there's 4 that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there are others. There's a so-called yopo, which is a seed of a tree in the mimosa family. Then there is ayahuasca, of course, and there's malakawa, which is from the Pandiflora family. And then you also have the San Pedro cactus, which is used by a lot of shamans. I think there are other plants, but those are 4 that I know of. I've used 2 of them so far. But these plants are, not only are they conscious, I would say they are hyperconscious, greatly more conscious than most human beings, with exception of the vastly conscious beings like Jesus and Krishna and the Buddha and so forth. But these plants are considerably conscious. And when you drink their juices, you so to speak connect with them. It's as if their juices function somewhat like a modem in connecting your consciousness with theirs. And if you're open to it, you can go. I haven't found any end or limit to the consciousness of ayahuasca or of Malikawa, for example. I have perceived them to be just bottomless wells of insight and knowledge and communication. They're vastly conscious. So this is something that the mainstream culture doesn't understand very well because it's so artificial.
Mm-hmm, right.
But
and how long does the ayahuasca last when you take it?
Depends. It depends on the brew, depends on the individual, on the setting. It can be anywhere from, I've seen people who drank it and nothing happened. I also observed they were very artificial people from the cities, their mentality. Let me give you an example. 2 young women who came, I forget if they were from Boston, from MIT, or if they were from New York City, Soho, living in Soho and going to Columbia, something like that. 2 kind of snooty, very, I don't know what you would, how to describe them, almost politically correct feminists from the urban Northeast corridor. And well-to-do. I mean, these were not working girls. These were, I believe they probably went to prep schools, for example. So they came to the Amazon, the rural Amazon, and they were in this little shack. The discussion they were having at supper, the night before they were going to drink ayahuasca, was, well, we don't have any salmon. I suppose we could substitute some tuna fish, but we only have tuna fish and water. And then the discussion was, they're in the Amazon, and they don't have salmon. Of course they don't. And then the discussion was, well, but we don't have any what is it? White wine that goes with fish, I guess it is. I suppose we could drink red wine just this once. And that was the gist of the conversation. And then the other thing was, they didn't have whatever fancy schmancy type of pasta they wanted, and they decided, well, maybe we could, since we don't have that, maybe we could just eat elbow macaroni instead. And I was thinking, do you think? Maybe? Oh, such suffering, such deprivation. They didn't have their fine wine. They didn't have their fresh fish from Whole Foods, et cetera, et cetera. And I watched all of this, and then the next night, they went and drank ayahuasca. Nothing happened. They didn't even throw up. Wow. They didn't vomit, didn't have any visions, no telepathic insights. I mean, just zip. And I thought to myself, well, isn't that something? Because ayahuasca always sends me reeling. To me, it's on a physical level alone, I can hardly choke a couple of swallows down without projectile vomiting. I mean, it's not easy stuff for me and for a lot of people. But for them, it was just like nothing. Nothing happened. There are a lot of people like that in the culture today. They're so artificial that when they have, intimate contact with a hyperconscious plant, nothing happens. Mm-hmm. My perception is, because always with me, ayahuasca and also malika was the same way. After you drink the juices of these plants, not saying that they're easy to drink, but once you drink them and you keep them down, and that can be a struggle in itself to keep them down until the waves of nausea subside, which may take a little while. Then there's a period, can range anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, in which it seems that nothing is happening until it does. When it starts happening, you'll know it. But until then, the juice of the plant is going into your system. It goes in your stomach, then it passes through the blood capillary membrane, goes into your blood system, gets transported all over your body, including to your brain. My perception is that the plant is reading you. It's reading your genetics. It's reading your emotions. It's reading your life history. It may be going through, even through your ancestry, you see, down through your genetic code, through your DNA. It's reading your knowledge base. What do you know? It's reading your attitudes, your proclivities and propensities, your abilities. And then after having comprehensively read you, it decides what to do. And it's different every time. Every time it's different. There can be, but sometimes it can repeat. I'll give you an example of another vision. This was from early 2012. I had drunk ayahuasca with one of the indigenous shamans, and we were in a lean-to that we had made earlier before dark, and it was raining. Most of the night it rained cats and dogs with thunder and lightning. And in the midst of all of that, I asked ayahuasca to show me what's going to happen in the future. Now understand, I still carry an American passport, though by this time next year I'd be surprised if I still had one, a valid one. And then I asked it, so the understanding was, ayahuasca's understanding would have been that this guy who formally has so-called American citizenship is asking what's going to happen in the future. Near future understood, not 10 billion years from now. And understood also on the earth, and understood implicitly in the United States, or having to do with the United States. Trust me on this, the plants are incredibly wise, and whatever you think you know, they know so much more. They also are not bound by a linear concept of time. They perceive the past, the present, and the future, but they don't have mental blocks with respect to the past and the future the way we do. We forget so much, and as regards the future, we say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I think subconsciously we do know quite a lot about the future, but our conscious mind says, well, how should I know? I live in the present, and the future is just opaque to me. Not for these shamanic plants. They're very well plugged in. And so I posed the question telepathically. And then nothing happened, and about maybe half a minute later, it was as if I were looking at a flat panel television screen or a flat panel computer monitor. I was shown a scenario of military dictatorship with a concentration camp, gun towers in the corner, a security fence, military vehicles inside, floodlights, raked gravel inside the compound and around the perimeter, and I thought, this does not look good. So I asked the same question again. About a half a minute later, bing, the same vision just popped into my inner visual field, identical without any change. Ayahuasca was telling me, look, what, you didn't believe me before? Okay, here it is. This is the answer to your question. So I thought, okay, but that looks pretty grim. There was a second component to that. Over top of the concentration camp was a mesh or a grid hovering in the air. It had a kind of phosphorescent green color. It was a mesh like a fishing net, something like that, only it wasn't. But it somewhat reminded me of the mesh in a fish net. But it covered this whole compound in the air. suspended in the air. And I was given to know just directly, like telepathically, that this mesh is all controlling. It's a totalitarian control mechanism to control all human action and behavior and activity, emotions, thoughts, ideas, and including the human spirit extending into the astral realm. That this the aegis of this control grid is operative here in the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm, not at the high level where God is, of course, but at the lower level that's close to this physical earth realm. And it is meant for the total control of the human race, up, down, and sideways. Now, if you look around the world, you can see that the spy agencies have put scores of surveillance satellites into orbit. Mm-hmm. The NSA is vacuuming all our communications. In recent days, it's been revealed that the FBI has its own Air Force, its own fleet of aircraft that's constantly flying over American cities and surveilling God knows what and God knows who below. There are the Gwen towers, which maybe you're aware of, which broadcast in microwave frequency range. And certain microwave frequencies are psychoactive. There are brain transmitters, for example, that are out there. The HARP technologies, the so-called ionospheric heaters that electrically excite the Earth's atmosphere, but they also broadcast at low, very low frequencies of 1, 2, 3, 4 hertz. Those frequencies are psychoactive at the delta wave level in the human brain, meaning that they influence your brain at a subconscious level. Mm-hmm. So they can inject all kinds of things into your awareness at a subconscious level, and consciously you won't be aware that your mind is being tampered with and programmed. And all of this is going on. We know about these things publicly. How much more is going on that we don't know about?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yep. You're so right. You know, when you mentioned that green mesh, boy, that sounds like the frequency fence. That sounds, reminds me of Skynet and some other things that they've been involved in.
Well, Skynet's part of it. Mm-hmm. That's the, it's run mostly by Britain, but I think it's jointly operated by all of the Five Eyes partners, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. But yes, it is a control grid. It's you could call it a frequency fence. That'd work for me. But ayahuasca showed it to me explicitly twice. You see, the first time I was looking at this thing, and I thought, oh, wow, that's just nasty looking. So I was thinking, maybe ayahuasca didn't understand my question very well. It understands everything very well. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, I thought, well, I'll just put the question to the ayahuasca again, because maybe this really isn't the answer, and maybe the question wasn't understood. So I mentally formulated the same question again, and with some delay. It's like ayahuasca was thinking about things, or maybe scrying the near future probabilities. Then it was like, okay, he's asked again, let's reflect on this again. And the answer was, well, yep, sure enough, that's the answer. Here you go.
Wow.
And look at it. Look at it. All these military exercises that are being run all over the United States. Mm-hmm. The upcoming Jade Helm exercise. And these are just the ones we know about publicly. Mm-hmm. And you can see the dictatorship being set up. In fact, we discussed earlier the NDAA in the first part of this interview. And that is transparently a military dictatorship law. All military dictatorships give themselves the right to just pick people up and disappear them. That is what military dictatorship is.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you're talking globally too, right? I know there's a focus on the U.S. right now, but what about global? This is a global event, what it sounds like.
Yes, I think it does have global implications. I mean, certainly there are countries that are under open dictatorship right now.
Mm-hmm.
There are many very restrictive countries. I would say, in a lot of ways, that right now the European countries, in important ways, are more restrictive and oppressive than the United States, though the United States is a very oppressive and repressive society. Look at Great Britain. There's a surveillance camera on every corner.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Look at France and Germany. I was in Germany 15 years ago. I spent the summer in Germany in 1999. And Germany is a very controlled society. Why? At the conclusion of World War II, the Germans were forced to sign a 150-year treaty with the United States, granting the United States to quarter military forces there. And also, the United States played a leading role in writing the new German Constitution. To this day, you can see Germany following the United States policy lead in the run-up to war against Russia. What possible good could it be to Germany to go to war against Russia? They tried that in the 1940s and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. And they're getting ready to do it again, along with the United States, go to war against Russia. So you can see how controlled German society is. And in fact, one of the major German journalists in recent weeks confessed publicly that the CIA controls the German mass media, that so many German journalists and media personalities are taking money from the CIA, and that he had taken money from the CIA. So you can see that what you say is true, that this control mechanism, control of societies and governments and the people in the societies, is true of the United States, but internationally as well.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is. And Richard, we have questions in chat. I was going to just read off to you if you would like to answer them.
Let's get to them.
Okay.
I see a couple of them right
yeah.
here.
And so, do you want me to read them out loud? So I guess so the listeners
Yes.
know. Okay.
One of them is from Kuran, who would love to know, I hope I pronounced Kuran's name correctly, would love to know about the underground portion of Camp David. Well, let me tell you, I've personally spoken with two people who have been into Camp David. And I'll first tell you what I know from my documentary research, my literature search, which was pretty painstaking. Camp David was built by the Seabees and decades ago. And the United States Marines provide security there. So it is a military reservation. Publicly, it's in the Catoctin Mountains in northern Maryland, north of Washington, D.C., just south of the border with Pennsylvania, about 6 miles from Site R, which is a major military underground facility. And Camp David has two components. It has the above-ground component with the rustic retreat cabins and conference rooms that you can sometimes see in pictures if you research it on the internet. That is the part that is publicly discussed. By far the larger part of Camp David is underground and sprawls. It's multi-level, it's big, and it sprawls for miles. The first person I talked to who was in there used to go in there routinely as part of his work. He worked for a federal contractor who had a maintenance contract. There are some very sophisticated technology deep underground at Camp David. And mind you, that region is part of the Catoctin Mountains, are a low range of mountains in Maryland that extend northwest of the Washington, D.C. area, right up to the Pennsylvania border. Mm-hmm. He went in multiple times to perform maintenance under the contract that his company had. He had a security clearance for that So I asked him what it was like, and he said, well, it's vast and very labyrinthine. I asked him, well, how vast, how labyrinthine? He said, well, it's so big and sprawls so much. There's so many rooms and storerooms and work areas and passageways and doorways with guards, etc., that in his view, no one person could possibly have in his or her mind the layout of the place because it is so large. It's like an anthill down there. Hmm. And he went in repeatedly. I talked to another guy who was in there. He went into the third level. His father worked in the military, and for some reason, he went in, I guess, with his father at a young age. But his father was a lifer in the military. And he went into there was an underground mess hall or big cafeteria area, very large eating area for the people who work underground. Evidently, there are quite a lot of people down there. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I know about Camp David, that it's big and it sprawls, and whatever has been admitted about it publicly doesn't even begin to scratch the surface because most of it is underground. Now, it's very close to Site R, and the rumor is that, in fact, the whole complex connects with Site R, such that Site R is the, so to speak, the military, the heavily military end of it, and then Camp David is the executive office of the president end of it, but that in reality it's one big complex because, remember, Camp David was built by the Seabees. The Seabees are the Navy construction agency, and it's the guard force is the United States Marines, so Camp David really is a United States military reservation. Factually, it would amount to a United States military underground base, and a big one.
Right. And how can you elaborate on Site R? What does that actually stand for?
Raven Rock is what
okay.
R stands for, Raven Rock. And it used to be run by Fort Ritchie, Site R, Site Ritchie, right? But also called Raven Rock. It used to be administered by Fort Ritchie, which is a nearby military base. I'm not sure if Fort Ritchie is still the responsive administrating agency, but Site R is still there. It still is a major underground military base. It is considered to be the underground Pentagon, if you will. Though there also is a major underground component beneath the Pentagon. I've been told it goes down something like 6 levels, but I suspect 6 levels, but maybe the 6 levels are 3,000 feet underground, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yeah, that's pretty intense. Now, let me ask you something real quick. Now, considering that we have a magnetosphere that's getting weaker and a potential pole shift, wouldn't it make sense for some of these places to be evacuated? How are they going to withstand that if technically that happens?
Well, they would probably be better off underground than on the surface.
Okay, all right.
Because a well-designed, well-engineered, well-designed underground base that's in competent rock, I mean without a lot of fractures and faults, or without seismic faults and fractures, can actually be safer in a violent earthquake than being on top, for example, in an apartment building, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's my understanding from reading a lot of geological engineering literature and underground base literature, most of which is not easy to get your hands on, by the way, and that's why I spent a block of time over about 10 years or a little more intensively researching it. It's not something you will do all in one day or even all on the internet, not by far. Mm-hmm. Now, as far as a possible pole flip, yes, I've had some very vivid dreams over the years. And in one of those dreams, I suddenly found myself in what would resemble a huge glass greenhouse or a huge glass wigwam, if you will. And there were 2 very attractive young women with me. Again, it was like with the other 2 young women, and maybe they're the same women. I felt 100% comfortable with them, and vice versa. As I was in this glass house with them, I noticed that the sun had stopped at about the 10 o'clock position, had stopped moving, because we were there for a period of time. And I remarked to them, you know, I've noticed that the sun hasn't moved for a while. It looks like it's stopped in the sky. And they said, oh yeah, that's right. You're exactly right. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, the earth has stopped rotating. I said, really? And they said, oh yeah. And then I asked them, but why? Why has the earth stopped rotating? And they said, well, the earth has just begun a pole flip. And I said, you get out of here. A pole flip? You mean the earth is going to flip its poles? And I said, oh yeah. And they were just as calm and as nonchalant about it as you could be. Well, I, of course, was a little bit alarmed. And then I said, well, how long is it going to take? And they said, well, a period of hours. They were just so relaxed about it. And indeed, it did seem to take about, I would estimate, no less than 6.
Oh, where'd he go? Hang on, everybody. Darn it. I don't know if I lost him. Stay with me. Hang on. So we might have an interference again. Lost him again. Hang on, everybody. Getting him right back. Well, we did pretty good. Hang on for a minute. Oh, okay. You there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can certainly hear you. Yes. Welcome back.
Yes. Well, and then the earth slowly began to move in the opposite direction and then rotated faster and faster till the sun in a few hours set where it had risen maybe a day earlier. And then the interesting thing was, after that, after the rotation had reversed, there was the mother of all rainstorms. I mean, raindrops the size of Olympic swimming pools. It's like getting, 500,000 gallons of water in one raindrop. Just boom, coming down. And we're not talking about a flood or a biblical deluge. It was, Noah would have had a heart attack. Within 2 minutes, there was 10 feet of water and rising. But somehow in this glass structure, all glass structure with these two women, I was in a safety cocoon. But as all of this was happening, as the earth reversed its rotation, I was thinking, now don't you know that's going to cause some huge earthquakes and tsunamis, because the oceans are going to be caused to slosh the opposite way from where they usually do. And then as the rainfall began, I was thinking, oh, lordy, this is just going to strip everything down to the bedrock, because the scouring power of moving water is phenomenal. It has tremendous force, tremendous erosive power. And I'm guessing that if something like that happens, it would pretty well obliterate this so-called modern civilization.
Yep. Absolutely it would.
And I would guess you would have a survival rate of somewhere far south of 1%, such that those who would survive, if there were to be a pole flip, would be at a very basic level of life existence. I would think there would be no libraries, there would be no iPhones, etc.
Exactly. Right. Oh, that's quite. I don't want to say prophetic.
Now, I'm not saying there is definitely going to be a pole flip. I'm just saying that was this pronounced theme of that vivid dream I had a few years ago, and that it seems there have been pole flips in the past in the geological record. The continents have not always been where they are now. The magnetic field has not always had the polarity it has now. So clearly there has been major geomagnetic and geophysical change on this planet in the past. Major with a capital M. So can it happen again? Well, why not?
Right. I think it's in motion to some degree. And also, we're getting ready to wrap this up in about 15 plus or minus minutes, but I want everybody to know how to access your books. Now, I know they're on Amazon.com. Is that the best way to get them?
Well, you can go to Amazon.com, and by the way, my name is Richard Sauder. The last name is spelled Sauder. There's no N. Sauder. And you can go to Amazon and find my books, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files, Underwater and Underground Bases, and also Underground Bases and Tunnels. What is the government trying to hide? And people can go to my blog, which I periodically update with new blog posts. The blog is Event Horizon Chronicle. And the URL is Event Horizon Chronicle, one word, .blogspot.com. And I believe you have a link up for that on your website somewhere, don't you?
Yeah, I put the link up, and I also have it in chat for everybody as well. So.
Well, yeah. Thank you. And they can access my books right through my website. Click on the right-hand sidebar and just click on the book covers, and they'll be taken to where they can order, or they can look up the book titles on Amazon.com and buy them there. Now, there's another question here I see, Solaris.
Yes, there is.
Did I ever get a chance to talk with Phil Schneider concerning the underground bases? Well, I talked with Phil Schneider. Never met him personally, but Phil and I did talk a couple of times on the telephone this was back in the mid-1990s. Phil told me that I told Phil, extraordinary claims require some kind of proof, otherwise it's hearsay. So will you please send me some documentation that demonstrates the truth of what you're saying? He said, I will. I'll send you a box of documents. And then he never did. Phil never sent me one thing. And I talked to him a couple of times. Then I heard that he had been killed. Mm-hmm. And then Phil Schneider, though, of course I've watched some of his talks on YouTube, and I've also read what he said ostensibly about me, talking about Richard Sauder. First of all, he said that he misspelled my last name, Souder. Then he said I was a PhD architect. That's not true. I do have a PhD in political science, but I'm not an architect, and I've never had anything to do, whether professionally or on an informal, personal basis, with architecture. In no way. So that's false. Right there, he was putting out disinformation about me. And then he went on to say that I had worked in the field, either designing or helping to build underground bases. That also is false. So right there you see, with biographical information, basic biographical information about me, he was putting out data, personal data about me, that are false. I say that by way of preface. If he got the basic biographical facts of my life and my career that wrong, then what else did he get wrong? Mm-hmm. So I take what Phil Schneider says with a grain of salt. Now, there are underground bases. Oh, yeah. And some of them are very deep and big. Mount Weather's an example. Raven Rock's another example. Cheyenne Mountain. So even from public record, we know of a number of them that are large, technically sophisticated. Camp David's another one. That are big, deep underground and expensive and huge. And the Monsanto base in New Mexico is another one. And there's just a bunch of them. So he's got that right. Yes, these facilities exist. They're deep, they're big, they cost a lot of money, they're technologically sophisticated. So that part of it is right. Whether Phil Schneider actually had anything to do with it, I don't know. And he's dead, so none of us are really going to easily know. Mm-hmm. Now, beyond that, he said he was in a firefight with aliens underground at an alleged base near or beneath the small Jicarilla Apache town of Dulce, just south of the Colorado border. Now, he said the proof of that is that he's got a big burn mark on his chest. I think he showed that burn mark to people. I never met him personally, so I never saw it. But let's say that he did have a burn on his chest. Well, there are all kinds of ways to get burned. In industrial accidents, working on your car, using a blowtorch inappropriately, and there's an explosion and burns you, or you could even burn yourself on purpose as part of a scheme to make money and to bring notoriety to yourself. There are people who self-mutilate for all kinds of reasons. So even if he did have a burned area on his chest, it doesn't mean an alien shot him with a flash gun.
Right. Good point. I agree with you.
So I don't know what to think about Phil Schneider, and since I don't know what to think about him, I put a big question mark over him, his life, and his purported career. I will say, for me, Phil Schneider is classic disinformation in that he got my basic biographical data wrong, even misspelled my name. And my career and my academic background, and I have heavily researched underground bases, but I've certainly never worked in the agencies and never had anything to do with designing them or building them. And that's what he said. So if he got that so wrong, what else?
Right. Are you there?
And that's what I have to say about Phil Schneider. But as regards underground bases, oh yeah, there are underground bases.
Let me ask you something real quick. Now, the underground bases, obviously, military's created some of these, but were there some bases already created by perhaps an earlier intelligence that's once dwelled here that they've kind of hijacked and have used?
You know, I can't prove that, but I don't rule it out. I've heard some whispered anecdotes about that here and there. The issue with that whole line of inquiry is that, like Fletcher Prudy said, there you're getting into the realm of the classified realm of special operations. And no one who knows anything is going to talk to you about it. Right. They just won't. Because not only are you dealing with underground and undersea facilities then, but you're also edging into the ET arena and or the technically advanced, extremely ancient human civilization era from previous cycles of development on this planet. And both of those are areas they're very compartmentalized areas of knowledge and information that you cannot crack unless you're in a compartment in one of the agencies, whether it's one of the initiatic institutions like the Freemasons, for example, or the CIA is also an initiatic agency or institution, in that once you go in, you're compartmentalized, you get a certain body of knowledge and understanding, and you can't talk about it to outsiders. It's one of the rules of membership. To belong to the club, you have to seal your lips, and if you don't, there are those who will seal them for you.
Exactly. And how deep do you think these underwater facilities are, estimation-wise?
Well, in the case of the documentation I've gotten from the United States Navy and also from Stanford Research Institute in California, this is from the mid to late 60s, so almost half a century ago. The way the R&D documents that I obtained explained it, you could either tunnel out down in the bedrock beneath the seafloor from on land. For example, you could drop a vertical shaft straight down 2 miles and then take tunnel boring machines down, take the component sub-assemblies of drilling machinery down there and send mechanics down to put it together, and then begin to bore out laterally from the bottom of a very deep vertical shaft. And this technology was even state-of-the-art in the mid to late 1960s. It's far more advanced today. And then you could even tunnel hundreds of miles, whole mazes of tunnels down in the seafloor and the bedrock beneath the ocean bed. So that's one way you could do it, and it could be quite deep. So you could have a mile or two of water, and then you could be hundreds or even 1,000 or 2,000 feet down in the bedrock beneath that. Mm-hmm. And then they could also bore directly from the seafloor. The way they would do that is modify petroleum drilling equipment and use a bit maybe 8 or 10 feet in diameter. Bore out a deep, straight borehole in the ocean floor, in the bedrock, and then lower a huge stainless steel metal tube with an airlock on it into that hole, and you could be down a couple thousand feet underwater, you see, mm-hmm. and lower that into the hole and cement it in with fast setting cement. Once that is firmly set into place, you send down a diving bell with an airlock on it with your men in it, you see. You already have the boring machine or drilling machine assemblies inside that tube when you send it down there. So send these guys down on a diving bell. They lock on to the air hatch, and then they go in, mm-hmm. and they begin to bore from there. And you can send more men down and supplies as needed and send them through the airlock. And using that initial tube as an entry point, you can just expand out down in the bedrock beneath the sea. That's another way is to construct artificial islands or to use already existing islands in mid-ocean. Mm-hmm. Bermuda would be an example, the Azores, etc. Puerto Rico, any island, artificial or natural. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, the Chinese are building some artificial islands right now in the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Well, they could certainly sink shafts down from those islands and then create a tunnel network under the seafloor. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they're going to do that, but they have the technology to do that if they want to, and maybe they do. Maybe they're doing that right now. So there's different ways to create this network of tunnels and airlocks and living and working facilities beneath the sea. In fact, the documentation that I saw planned to have huge airlocks, and they would be deep underwater, where large military submarines would come in and go through underwater tunnels and then would be berthed in deep sea bases where I saw plans to pull in up to 4, 5, 6 huge submarines at a time. And these submarines can be 500 or 600 feet long, 100 feet from the top of the conning tower to the bottom of the hull. So you can imagine the size of these airlocks would just be vast, and the tunnels as well. And they're talking about doing this back in the 1960s. So the technology to do this existed half a century ago, and the technology has only become more refined and sophisticated in the intervening years. Now, I've been told of one facility of this type that, in fact, is on Andros Island in the Bahamas. The United States Navy does have its deep sea warfare center there. It's called AUTEC, AUTEC. Publicly, the information is that they have some facilities on top of the island, and then there's a huge, deep body of water there right beside Andros Island. It goes down, I think a mile or more, and they use it for submarine testing range and undersea weapons testing range. But I've been told that actually there are tunnels there to bring in large military submarines into a base that has been constructed beneath Andros Island. So that's a similar concept to what I've been talking about. I believe it exists.
That's fascinating. And you know what, Richard, we're just about out of time here, and I can't thank you enough. It's been an honor to interview you tonight. It's been incredible. Love to have you back.
Well, that'll be fine. We could talk again. And I want to say likewise that I enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, you're very enlightened, and I know our listeners really appreciated you tonight. Do want to thank everybody for tuning in, and please stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mickey, of course, coming up next, sailing it on into the night from down under. Any final thoughts here? I mean, you mentioned Andros Island. Didn't there wasn't there a pyramid discovered off of Andros Island?
Well, I don't know about that. Edgar Casey said that the area of the Bahamas was part of Atlantis thousands of years ago. I can't speak to that. But I do know, in general, from my research, that there are archaeological remains undersea all around the world. Some of them are pretty deep undersea, so who knows what's there.
Right. Yeah, I find that fascinating. Well, I know the military likes to stake power spots, as we all know, so, who knows?
Solaris, that wouldn't surprise me at all. It's just that I can't say one way or the other, but if someone has evidence of that, I'd sure like to see it.
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I guess the best way to do that would be through your blog spot?
Yes, my email address is right there on my blog site.
Excellent. Well, I want to wish you well where you're at, and yeah, let's have you back really soon, because this has been an incredible interview, and you have so much wisdom in so many different areas. We didn't even get to touch on a lot of other things, but thank you again so much, Richard, and take care, everybody, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listening to Revolution Radio.